All right, got a fun one for you today. Brad Rowland from Locked On Hawks joins the show to talk about our takeaways from the first two games of the Heat and Hawks series, what they have done to limit Trae Young, and if there's anything that Atlanta can do as the series heads back that way for games 3 and 4. We also talk about what's impressed us the most about the Miami Heat and some potential opportunities for the Atlanta Hawks in the offseason. All of that and more is coming up next.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome to a special crossover episode of Locked On Heat and Locked On Hawks. I'm Wes Goldberg from Locked On Heat, here with Brad Rowland from Locked On Hawks. However you may be listening or tuning in on YouTube, Odyssey, or wherever you get your podcast, thank you for making the Locked On Podcast Network your first listen every day. Let's just jump right into this series, Brad. We're recording this the day after the Heat beat the Hawks 115-105 to take a 2-0 series lead as the series goes back to Atlanta, and not looking good for the Hawks right now. We'll get into all of that. What's impressed you with the Heat? We'll talk about Miami's surging half-court offense, and then some other things later on. But this series starts with Trae Young, right? Everything that is going on in this series kind of starts and stops with Trae Young. And right now, Trae Young's stats through two games: 16.5 points, 34.4% shooting, 11.8% from three-point range, which is not good, 5.5 assists, and 8 turnovers a game. Now, a lot of it's two games. Most of that is brought down by a really tough game one for him. Game two looked a little bit more reminiscent of Trae Young, but still below the all-NBA type player we saw in the regular season. So I want to ask you, what have you seen from the Hawks' perspective from Trae Young? What is it? Is it more him? Is it, in your opinion, the Heat limiting him?
I think it's really both. I mean, game one, as I'm sure I know you guys talked about, game one was just kind of a lost cause for the Hawks, almost start to finish. They kind of just never found anything that they wanted to see. And Miami defensively, I made the point on my show that I thought game one Miami was the single best defense that the Hawks have seen all year long. When you take into account the situation and the rotation Miami's playing, their best guys and all that stuff on the road, etc. And they just had no second pitch. Basically, it was basically if Trae doesn't have it. That's been a criticism of the Hawks all year long, is if Trae doesn't have his A game, the Hawks are not always going to have the best options on offense. And I think that Trae's not played very well through two games. You mentioned it. He was a little bit better in game two, but at the same time, he had 10 turnovers in game two, which is a number that I always kind of point this out. Like, if you look at the turnover leader list in the NBA, it's all the best players in the league for the most part. So like having turnovers is not the biggest deal in the world, but you can't have 10. Like, you can't turn the ball over 10 times. And then 3-point shooting, like you said, too. So he's not gotten comfortable. I think his decision-making has been a little bit jarred in this series, and credit to Miami for some of that stuff as well. And the switching scheme has been a problem for the Hawks at times, and Miami playing lineups that, they're playing really good defense, obviously. So it's kind of a mixture of all those things put together. But certainly Trae's going to have to be better in this series. We can talk about that, I'm sure. But through two games, he hasn't been good, and Miami is certainly at least partly responsible for that.
Yeah, Trae Young, minus 23.1 points per 100 possessions in this series. Like, that's really bad. Like, the Hawks are not winning, and they've got no chance if that's the case. You mentioned the turnovers, and I had this thought. I was at FTX Arena for game two, and, there were so many possessions where Trae Young is just trying to get it to a big man on a roll or something like that. And you've got some Miami Heat player with arms and body and vertical and athleticism just sort of jumping into the passing lane and kind of creating these pick six type situations, right? And you're right. The best players in the league do turn the ball over, but not all turnovers are created equal, right? And so many of these turnovers for Atlanta are just leading into just easy buckets for the Heat. And the whole thing with Miami is, hey, get them in the half court set, and that's really your only chance, because in transition they're killers. And Atlanta's kind of just gifting them I shouldn't say gifting. That's not fair, because I think that actually takes some credit away from Miami's defense, because like you said, it is sort of like the kryptonite version of a defense for the Hawks, right? You've got 1 through 5. They could switch everything. Like Atlanta wants to run all that high pick and roll, but Bam can survive on an island with Trae Young, and they're really happy with those defensive possessions when Bam and Trae Young are just out there on the perimeter. Like they're good with that. And I don't really know what the Hawks can do. Their half court offense has been a real problem. They were the number 1 half court offense in the NBA in the regular season. Now, again, 2 games, small sample, but just goes to show like how the Heat have limited them. 93.9 points per 100 half court plays per cleaning the glass in these 2 playoff games. That would go from 1st to 23rd in the league in the regular season. That's behind Cleveland, Sacramento, Memphis, the Lakers. I think it's just a hair better than the Knicks half court offense. Anything else you've noticed from Atlanta? Like, what can they do from now that the series is back at home for them? Is there anything that they can do to try to juice this half court offense?
Yeah, I think we saw even a little bit in game 2, having John Collins as a guy slipping screens who's a little bit more experienced at navigating this kind of system was very helpful. They were better in game 2, as much as those numbers are really awful, and they are, and they were still bad in game 2, but game 1 versus game 2 was night and day. The Hawks at least had some threats in game 2, particularly when Collins was out there. Trae was a little bit more comfortable. You talked about it, though, the live ball turnovers. That's the thing about this Hawks team. As much as I picked on their defense this year, that's been a problem in the series as well. Let's be clear about that. It's not only the offense, but the Hawks were number 1 in the NBA in turnover rate this year, and they turned the ball over 19 times in game 2, and they cannot afford that. The Hawks are not good enough other places to allow Miami, and particularly Miami with their transition offense that you reference, to do that. They cannot. They have to at least get shots up. If they miss them, they miss them. But the combination of bad ball security, bad 3-point shooting is basically untenable, because those are the 2, other than just the presence of Trae Young individually. The Hawks are really good at 2 things on offense, and it's lack of turnovers and 3-point shooting. And if you do neither one of those things, they're kind of drawing dead, basically. And part of that, again, is Miami's credit. But as far as like adjustments to make, it's not as simple as this, but they have to make threes in this series, that's for sure. Because especially as much as Trae, if you have a weakness of him, it might be attacking switches. And I think he'll get his at some point. He's going to have one big half, one big game, at least in this series at some point. I believe that. But everybody else is so reliant on 3-point shooting on this team. They don't have these guys that get to the rim a ton. Bogdanovich, Herro, Hunter, all these guys are still primarily jump shooters more than anything else. And we saw it in the second half. Bogdanovich got loose, and it got a little bit tight in the second half. And that's going to have to happen again for the Hawks to sustain offense, because it can't only be Trae. And if you go beyond Trae, it's basically maybe Collins at 80% and 3-point shooting.
Yeah, I don't know. I didn't love I understand why Nate McMillan went with John Collins. I didn't love the idea of pairing him with Danilo Gallinari in that front court. I get that, after game 1, Trae Young, Nate McMillan, they were all talking about, we got to increase spacing. All right, well, let's put our best 2 shooting big men out there together and let's increase the spacing. But like Gallinari was not good. He was 0 for 6 in game 2. A big regression from his big game 1 performance. And I don't know if McMillan was sort of beholden because of the game 1 performance. I think everybody on planet Earth knew like he wasn't going to do that again. I actually have liked what I've seen from like the Trae Young, John Collins plus DeLon Wright combos. Like you've gotten some really interesting looks out of that. They were plus 12 in 10 and a half minutes almost in that last game. And I like DeLon Wright for them. I think he was the only player that had a positive plus minus in game 2 for the Hawks. He gives you a little bit more ball handling. Obviously, defensively, he's much more physical than somebody like Herter is, or even Bogdanovich, as important as he was on offense. Like DeLon Wright in a physical series where Miami is setting the tone by basically like Jimmy Butler strangling Trae Young early in game 1 and just letting them know, hey, this is how this series is going to be played. DeLon Wright's kind of like the only Atlanta Hawk that's sort of up for it, right? Like he's like, all right, I could do this. I could play this kind of series where everybody else is shying away. I think John Collins could probably do it too if he wasn't still kind of dealing with the foot stuff that's really like clearly still bothering him. But I would lean a lot more DeLon Wright. I would consider starting him if I were Nate McMillan.
Yeah, I think it's not crazy. People are going to laugh if they're listening to this on my side, is because I am probably the biggest DeLon Wright guy in the world. I am extremely pro DeLon Wright to the point where I get added on Twitter whenever he does anything good. I agree. I think especially with the way Gallo played in game 2, And, part of the problem right now is the lack of Clint Capella, and Capella being out feeds down from top to bottom. You don't have another big. You're playing Collins basically through 2 games. He's only played center in this series, and he's usually their primary power forward, Gallo, etc. And when they try to go small, DeAndre Hunter's got to play the 4, and he's one of their wings, and then you kind of filter down from there. They're playing smaller, and Miami plays kind of small at times with Jimmy Butler at the 4, but Jimmy Butler, as you well know, is not exactly a shy, sort of frail individual. He's very stocky and strong and physical. So the Hawks are not exactly built on toughness and physicality generally. They have a lot of guys who I would characterize not necessarily in a negative way, but as finesse guys. They're shooters. They're perimeter based. Gallo is a huge individual, but he's not this like bruiser either. So DeLon Wright and John Collins are their kind of mix it up guys, and Wright is their best perimeter defender. So more time with him is something that I'm never going to complain about ever, basically.
We'll shift gears here, talk a little bit more about the Heat and what's impressed us so far through the series with them. But first, let's talk about our friends at BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for all of your betting stats and sports information. Find all of the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's basketball playoffs and the start of the Major League Baseball season. BetOnline is your continued source for all of your sport wagering information, from live betting to playoffs, esports, and more. Taking a look at the odds this morning, Brad, the Golden State Warriors, now the NBA favorites, now the betting favorites to win the championship this year. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I noticed that. I think it might be a slight overreaction, but also the upside's pretty high for Golden State, so no complaints here, I guess.
Good time to take Phoenix. You're getting a little bit better odds now. I know that Devin Booker sounds like he's going to miss a couple games here, but I don't anticipate them losing to the Pelicans in that series. They'll get Devin Booker back. I don't know. If you love the Suns, now is time to take those odds. Head to the website today. Use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and the action. Bet online, where the game starts. Thank you for making the Locked On Podcast Network your first listen. For your next listen, check out the Locked On Now podcast. Nightly recaps of every NBA game with analysis from our local experts. Nobody does it like we do it on the Locked On Network. It's free. It's available wherever you get your podcasts. Back here, I'm Wes Goldberg from Locked On Heat, here with Brad Rowland from Locked On Hawks, breaking down the first couple games of this series. And we talked about Atlanta, maybe some adjustments that they could make. But it might just be like window dressing adjustments at this point. Do we see Atlanta coming back in this series and winning this series? No.
I think that certainly you can't pick it. I mean, even the biggest, I should say that even the biggest Hawks fans wouldn't say that they're going to come back and win this series. I think that they're not dead in the way that some might believe they are, because we've seen them kind of turn it on and be kind of unstoppable for games at a time. We saw it in the playoffs last year, and that kind of gives you a fighting chance. But if you do the math, having to win 4 out of 5 against the number 1 seed it's a tough ask for sure.
Yeah, and the Heat look like the number 1 seed in the Eastern Conference right now. I think they have the best or the second best point differential in the Eastern Conference right now. What has impressed me so much with the Miami Heat is just how they've imposed their will on this series. I think going into this series, that was the question, right? Would this be played more in Atlanta's kind of style, or would this be played more in Miami's style? And they, we could talk about some of the indicators. I keep talking about the key indicators, right? Like even in game 2, a lot of them favored Atlanta. They had more possessions. They had more 3-point attempts. Like all these things that you would, if you're a Hawks fan, those are kind of the indicators that you want to see from that team. But like the Heat just had Jimmy Butler, and he dropped 45 points in game 2, and he's been the best player on the floor. That's partly because, he had an awesome game, and he made 4 3-pointers, which is completely out of character for him. And that the Heat have also been limiting Trae Young. And that's kind of the part that I wanted to get to here is if you're the Heat and you could just throw so many layers of defense at Trae Young, and it starts with Gabe Vincent and Kyle Lowry and these guys at the point of attack. By the way, what have you thought about like Gabe Vincent and just his defense on Trae Young so far?
Yeah, he was really good in particular in game 2. I noticed him kind of popping off the screen, and he's someone I've always thought is kind of underrated defensively. I know you guys probably properly rate him, having covered him and watching him all the time. But yeah, he definitely bothered him. And you mentioned it, like they have so many options against Trae that teams just don't have. And if you were trying to pick like a defensive matchup that is probably the worst possible for Atlanta to face, it's probably this Miami team being able to switch and having all these options. So that's kind of part of the story right now.
Yeah, kind of getting the Lou Dort treatment, right? Where the ball handler, in this instance, Trae Young, kind of crosses half court and immediately starts asking for a teammate to set a screen so he can get a switch and is like, basically get this guy off me.
There's
I'm
just
sick
nothing
of him.
easy at all. Nothing
Yeah.
easy at all. Yeah.
Nothing easy. And so I've been impressed with that. I've been impressed with the 3-point shooting and kind of zooming out on Miami right now. That's really important for them. I think for the Heat, their path to the finals is going to be Jimmy Butler playing like he did or close to it in game 2, right? Being that apex predator type of wing. And the best regular season 3-point shooting team by percentage continuing to shoot well from distance in the playoffs, right? That's sort of how you even the playing field if you're Miami. When you talk about not having a guy of the caliber of a Jason Tatum or Giannis or Joel Embiid or Kevin Durant or one of these guys in the East, that's kind of how you do it. I don't know. From what you've seen the first couple of games, and maybe I guess what you thought about the Heat in the regular season, what do you think about their chances of coming out of the East?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're dangerous. Heat fans got a little bit angry with me about my pre-series discussions about Miami, and it wasn't that I was doubting Miami overall. It's that I had the questions that a lot of people have about their offense in particular. Like their defense, I trust wholeheartedly. Really, it's just that at times they've been able to go a little stagnant, as we talked about earlier, even with the half-court offense. And I will say, like you mentioned, if Jimmy Butler does what even 80% of what he did in game 2, they're very difficult to beat, because if Jimmy's making jump shots, it's kind of game over. He doesn't always do that, but when he does, like, good luck to the opposition. In terms of putting it all together, like, they have enough options where it's very helpful. We saw some foul trouble stuff in game 2 that's not necessarily worrying long term, but it is a reminder of like what happens if they have some issues with Bam and or PJ Tucker if they can't play. Like Dedmon was actually great. I'm actually a big Dwayne Dedmon guy. Back to his Atlanta days, but I do think that they have kind of the combinations that you would want. They have enough shooting. They have the guy who's the number one experienced guy in Jimmy. You have Lowry making all the winning plays that he does and making everybody in Atlanta hate him already in the series, as you might imagine. And it's just one of those. And Bam is of course Bam. So they have everything that you would want. My concern, I guess, something I sort of turn back to you. I'm sure you talk about this all the time. Is like, do they have the lineups that you can kind of do both with? Like if they have to play Duncan Robinson and Tyler Herro, obviously Duncan's. Hero's actually going to play a lot regardless. But if they have to play Duncan more for offense, like can they guard in those groups when they can't necessarily get away with it? Because the Hawks are pretty bad defensively, if we're being honest. If Miami has to go more offense, can their defense hold up in the same fashion? It's kind of like those 5-man units. Do they? I mean, they certainly have one or two, but do they have the balance when everybody has to play more minutes when it's not quite as easy on offense?
I thought it was pretty telling last night when Duncan Robinson off the bench has 2 quick fouls in 7 minutes, and Eric Spoelstra was just quick with that rope. He was just like, nope, this ain't your game, man. And he just took him out, and Duncan Robinson just didn't play again. He played 7 minutes. He picked up 2 fouls in those 7 minutes, and that was it.
After he was incredible in game 1 too. That's the crazy thing. That's something about Spoelstra is like he's willing to do that, because a lot of coaches, after they watch Duncan in game 1, are not going to play him 7 minutes in game 2 no matter what. It's just what it is.
I mean, we kind of saw the same version of that, right? With Nate McMillan playing Danilo Gallinari down the stretch when, I didn't even say the stat in the first segment, but Collins and Gallo together were outscored by 9 points in their time together. Like that's bad. That's very bad in the short amount of time that they played together. And you get to have that when you're Eric Spoelstra and you're the second longest tenured coach in the league, and you have the resume that he has. Like that's kind of part of coaching, is that if you kind of have that autonomy to do those kinds of things and make those decisions. Also part of it too is like Caleb Martin didn't play any real minutes. He played in garbage time in game 1, didn't play any meaningful minutes. But in game 2, Spo went to him early when Duncan Robinson got into foul trouble, and then Bam and PJ Tucker got into foul trouble. So he's just started playing Caleb Martin, and he played a bunch of important minutes for them. When he didn't play any important minutes in game 1, we still haven't seen Victor Oladipo. Like there are guys that Spo can go to. They're so deep. They have so many options here. They have so many different ways that they can play. A lot of different lineup options. One thing that I did want to talk about is kind of the trend line of this half-court offense, because this has sort of been the Achilles heel for the Heat all year long. For most of the season, they were just at league average as far as half-court offense. And as we know, in the playoffs, things tend to slow down. You need to be able to generate points in the half-court setting. You need to get good shots, and the Heat had a hard time with that. But once the Heat sort of revamped their rotation after that 4-game skid that was headlined by the sideline kerfuffle thing and all and everything that happened there. Like they completely scrapped the rotation and rebuilt it around the central premise of getting Jimmy Butler in space. And Jimmy Butler plays more minutes at the 4 now with 3 shooters instead of 2 shooters. It's Kyle Lowry, Tyler Herro, Max Strus, or Duncan Robinson, or Gabe Vincent out there. Sometimes Caleb Martin, depending on the matchup. And Miami's half-court offense is basically taken off. Over the final 7 games of the regular season, the Heat had the second best half-court offense in the league. They were scoring 110.8 points per 100 half-court plays, which would have been far and away the best half-court offense. Again, small sample, but we're talking about trend lines here. And in the playoffs, it's been much of the same. They've been scoring 109.6 points per 100 half-court plays. So right there, with what they finished the regular season as, I don't anticipate them scoring at like historic levels in the half court going like when they start playing tougher defenses as the playoffs go on. But that's a good trend, right? Like that's a good sign if you're Miami is playing Jimmy Butler kind of the way that the Heat used LeBron when they had him, the way that Milwaukee likes to use Giannis in a lot of cases. It's sort of just put Jimmy Butler at the 4, surround him with shooting, and let him go to work. And in game 2 against Atlanta, like there were so many possessions where it was just Jimmy Butler in the middle of the floor getting to do whatever he wanted to do. Dribble, spin, put an elbow into some poor Atlanta Hawks chest. Like he was just able to do it all.
Yeah, the theory of that really makes a lot of sense, especially when you just see what Jimmy's been able to do with space around him. And I will stress that, this is not the most difficult matchup for the theory of that. The Hawks are perhaps the worst defensive team in the playoffs, if you look at their numbers from this season, especially without Capella. So, like, I'll be interested to see if they win the series as expected at this point, if Miami can continue this in the next round, because if we're just, again, I'm not trying to pick on the Hawks, but like beyond DeAndre Hunter, they don't really have any options to guard Butler. We saw they went to TLC, they went to Bogdanovich. They had no chance against Jimmy Butler in space. So like credit to Miami for taking advantage of that. But also at the same time, I don't know what that actually tells you long-term. It certainly is not a bad sign. And you know what better than I do about their pre-series production. But I guess the question would be like, can they also hold up defensively when you do that? And especially if you're playing like Herro Robinson together and all those questions that everybody else has.
They're good questions. Depending on what happens, I mean, I fully expect the Heat to get through this series, whether it's 4 games, 5 games, whatever it is. I don't know who they're going to play in the second round. Right now, it looks like Philly. We'll see what happens when the series goes back to Toronto. But those are much more different matchups. Let's put it that way.
Very different, yes.
Than the Atlanta, what the Atlanta defense presents for the Heat's offense. So we'll see. Coming up next, though, if this is the end of the season for the Hawks, what happens this offseason for Atlanta? It could be a really interesting offseason for them. But first, today's episode is brought to you by Built Bar. Built Bar is truly a standout among protein bars with its exceptional nutritional profile and so many delicious flavors. Built Bar is the favorite protein bar of many discerning fitness trainers and fitness enthusiasts alike. All Built Bars are covered in 100% real chocolate, taste better than your current protein bar, and are perfect for an after-workout snack or some needed energy in the middle of a busy day. Built Bars are low in calories and carbs. They're high in fiber. They're packed with protein. Check out these macros. Most Built Bars contain 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, and 17 grams of protein. If you compare that to most protein bars, Built Bars are a clear winner. Plus, they come in great flavors such as mint brownie, raspberry, salted caramel, cookies and cream, and more. And they have delicious new flavors coming out all the time, so check out Built.com often. And if you haven't tried the Puffs, then you're missing out on one of Built Bar's best-tasting products. Puffs are the first ever protein-infused marshmallow. They're fluffy, they're covered in 100% real chocolate, and they come in churro, coconut marshmallow, banana, cream pie, and other flavors. So here's the offer. Go to Built.com, use the promo code LOCKED15, and get 15% off on your order. Again, use the promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com. All right, back here with a Locked On Heat, Locked On Hawks crossover. I'm Wes Goldberg from Locked On Heat, here with Brad Rowland of Locked On Hawks. Make sure to subscribe to each show wherever you get podcasts and on YouTube. All right, so if this is the end of the road for the Hawks this season, where do you think that leaves them going into the offseason? Because this was a team that made the Eastern Conference Finals last year. You don't want to overreact to one playoff run in the way that a lot of teams do, the way when they do have playoff runs like that, and then they kind of have an early out the following year. But then again, Trae Young's that dude, right? Like he's that guy. Like you could build around him. And right now it just doesn't really seem like Atlanta's ceiling is where it wants to be, right? And so what do you think the Hawks can do this offseason?
Yeah, I'm, as you well know, covering a team, like I've been trying to kind of avoid this as much as possible just because the season's not over yet. And like, it's just difficult to do the dance of like, what do you talk about in the middle of a season? But
Right.
offline, this conversation happens all the time. And it's like, okay, are the Hawks going to run it back again? Basically is the broad question, because after their conference finals run last year, they basically ran it back. There were tweaks on the margins, but all of the core guys came back. They paid Kevin Herter, they paid John Collins, and they just basically pressed the button like, all right, let's just do this again. Hope for internal improvement, and we'll do this again. And with of course some hiccups along the way, like they just weren't as good this season in the regular season, and now so far through 2 games anyway in the playoffs. And part of that's injuries. Capella's been out, all that stuff, but I find it hard to believe that this front office and this owner in particular are going to be like, okay, let's just run it back again after what happened this year. Like Travis Schlenk kind of made some comments, made the rounds nationally about like, should I have paid all of these guys? And he said that on the record on the radio, like early in the season. I'm sure you even heard it. It became national news. And like that was months ago. And granted, they played better than that down the stretch. But like, I'm sure that hasn't left his mind. I'm sure he's questioning whether he should have made some changes in the last offseason. So if they were to go out quietly in this first round series, as many expect, I don't know what it's going to be, but I do think that there'll be some urgency to shake it up a little bit, because you mentioned having Trae Young speed you up, whether you want that to happen or not. Having a guy who's a top 15, 10, how do you want to say that player in the NBA, he's going to put some pressure on you internally, and also expectations are pretty high. So my sort of broader take is like someone in the top 7 or 8 isn't going to be there anymore. I don't know who it's going to be. It won't be Trae. Trae's going to be around. Don't fear. But I would say basically anybody else is available based on what you hear. So like some shakeups coming. I just don't know how big of one, I guess.
Yeah, hopefully it's better than the Cam Reddish for Kevin Knox exchange.
That was a Reddish for a first round pick exchange. I want to be. It's very funny because like, and you see that now. Like Cam didn't even play in New York, and kind of got a little bit of a feeling of why that happened. He wanted out, and that's okay. But yeah, that's a deal that's like kind of hard to sell in the middle of the season. It's one of those trades that you have to make because you have to make it. But like he made sure Travis did on the record, it was like look, we're trading for a pick. It's not really about Kevin, unfortunately. He's fine, but they wanted to look to the future. But listen, I mean, they have a lot of questions to answer. As much as that's crazy for a team that was in the conference finals less than 12 months ago, there are some questions. Let's just say.
Look, Trae Young had a career year, right? And
he was awesome.
He's the reason why the Hawks are in the playoffs. There's no doubt about it. And he's the superstar. If they go out in the first round the way that it looks like that's going to happen, then he's going to get a lot of blame, right? Like that's just the way it is when you're the superstar. But he shouldn't. It's not his fault. He's doing everything he can. You just like the Hawks did not get the leap from guys like Kevin Herter, DeAndre Hunter. Even like Clint Capella had a down year defensively. John Collins got hurt at the end of the season. Like there's a bunch of stuff that hurt them. I think I like Okongwu a lot. I just you're still kind of waiting for that leap to really happen with him. Like none of these other guys around Trae have kind of taken that next step forward. And so it is an interesting question is, okay, do we wait because we're still young and there's still a bunch of guys with a ton of potential here, or have we seen enough, or is Trae Young just so good that it doesn't really matter if they have potential because we can't wait for it. We got to go compete right away. It's such an interesting place for them to be. It's still a roster that's kind of ripe for a 2-for-1 or a 3-for-1 deal. Those are so much easier said than done, though. It's like, all right, who are you trading for?
I'm glad you said that, because that's been, even going back to last year, it's like, okay, consolidation trade. It's like, all right, who's the guy that they're going to get?
Yeah.
I mean, on one hand, I think the Hawks are actually underplayed nationally as a potential like star wants to go somewhere else destination, because they have all those pieces to trade, but that guy has to actually be available and actually has to fit on the roster.
Right.
So it's interesting. Like, and if you go player for player, this is not as easy as this, but like other than Trae, how many guys on this roster overachieved this year?
Zero.
Basically zero. I mean, you could start some guys maybe reach their normal level or maybe around their normal level, but nobody was like above their level this year. Right. And that's tough. I mean, somebody's got to have to overplay. And like guys like Hunter in particular was a pretty big disappointment this year overall. He was not very good. And he's the guy they pushed the chips in for. They traded 3 picks and other stuff. And that's the guy they can't afford to miss on. I'm not saying they missed so far, but it's not happened yet. Okongwu, Capella's pretty good down the stretch. I thought he was pretty awesome actually down the stretch, but early in the season wasn't quite himself. So yeah, they have some big picture questions in terms of like, do you push it in for somebody? And also some like on the margins questions about like, can you play around Trae Young without like elite defensive talent? Because we saw even with Capella on the roster and Collins, the guys who are pretty good defenders, they were 27th in defense. Like you can't win at 27th in defense ever, really.
No, I mean, look, it's not rocket science how to build around Trae Young. 4 good defenders around Trae Young. Period. That's how you play. Like they're
trying. That's what they've been trying to do, and that's what you saw. You saw the investment. Like they spent that whole draft on DeAndre Hunter and Cam Reddish for a reason. That was the theory around like, all right, defense first, wings around Trae. Yeah. And those, Reddish is already gone, and Hunter's been a little bit below the level so far. So that hurts them, and then you throw in everything else.
And that's why it's sort of hard to make these deals. If you it's really hard to trade the theoretical 3-and-D guy for the actual 3-and-D guy, right? Like there's just not a whole lot of trades like that out there. But that's really what they need to do. Like I don't.
Well, if you were in Atlanta, you would hear people asking if they should trade for Donovan Mitchell, which does not solve any of their problems. But he's a big name and he's very good at basketball. So there you go.
Hey, I mean, they would score 150 points a game.
Well, that's the thing.
160.
People get mad at me. I'm like, I'm not picking on Donovan Mitchell. He's really good, but that's not the guy that I would draw up in a lab to play with Trae Young on this team. So that's all that is.
Well, we'll see what happens. We got 2 more games in this series, maybe 3. We'll see what happens.
I'll take the over on 2. I will say on the record, I think the Hawks are going to win one of these games at home, at least one of these games. Like they've been so good at home. Trae's going to have a 40 piece at some point. I think the math would tell you the Hawks win one. It's not impossible that they get swept, but I will take the over 4.5, Wes.
All right. I'll go under. I like the sweep here. I think we're going to get maybe 1 first-round sweep, and I think I don't know what changes.
You might be right. I'm not saying you're going to be definitely wrong. I just say I think they get at least 1. I'm on the record about that.
Right.
I'm often framed as being too negative about the Hawks. I'm not doing it this time.
There it goes.
They get at least 1.
It's a good sign for Hawks fans when being positive about the Hawks is, we'll get 1 game in this series.
Yeah. I mean, I try to leave the door open as much as possible, and I was too low on the Heat. I will say that now after 2 games, I was too low on the Heat in this series. Even if the Hawks were to come back and win the series, I think I was probably still too low on my end coming in. So,
all right,
well, to all the Heat fans.
We got you on our side, Brad. That'll do it for us today. Remember to like and subscribe Locked On Heat and Locked On Hawks on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Comment and leave a 5-star rating. Follow us on Twitter. Thank you for making Locked On Heat and Locked On Hawks your first listen every day. Make your second listen the Locked On NBA podcast. Locked On experts covering the biggest stories around the NBA every Monday through Friday in less than 30 minutes. It's free. It's available wherever you get your podcasts.